Okay, so tonight, I want to bring you guys a message that I've entitled, When God Says No. When God says no. Yeah, it hurts a little bit. How many of you guys will raise a hand and just say you don't like being told no? It's just, okay, that went up fast. Okay. I'm talking to you tonight then. That's you guys that raised your hand. Even if you didn't raise your hand, I think there's something deep inside of all humans that just doesn't really want to be told no. But when God says no. Now, the reason I wanted to teach on this is actually due to a few conversations that I've had in the last several weeks with people who have come to me and they've been saying things like this to me. They would say, Brandon, I've been creating space in my life to hear from God. We've been talking about that, the last few weeks, and I've been trying to do that, but I've also been praying more. And I've been asking God for certain things in my life for the past few weeks, the past few months, maybe even the past few years. And I feel like God isn't responding. I feel like God is not answering my prayers. Now, one more moment of response for you guys. How many of you have ever prayed a prayer that you felt like God didn't answer? Would you raise your hand? You prayed something, you're like, I don't think God answered that prayer. Well, here's the deal. I've been there before, but one of the things that I want to tell you tonight is this, and I hope to prove it to you, is that there is no such thing as an unanswered prayer from God. Every prayer you pray is answered. And let me show you this, 2 examples of what would have been probably 30, okay? But we don't have time for that. Jeremiah 33:3, God says this. He says, call to me and I might answer you. No, he says, call to me and I will answer you. I will. I love Isaiah 65:24. He says, before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. He's like, before you even start praying, before you even pick up the phone, he's like, I'm already answering. I'm already ready, and I hear you before you even finish what you are saying. So here's the thing. What I want you to know right off the bat tonight is every prayer that you pray is heard by God, and every prayer is answered. Just not always in the way that we want it to be answered or we think that it should be answered, right? Every prayer is answered. And here's just the reality. He doesn't always answer the way you want. I heard a pastor say this years ago, and I had to remember this because I don't have the notes from it, but he said something like this. He said, God will answer all your prayers, and he will answer them one of 3 ways. God will say yes. He will say later. He's like, okay, I like where I like that idea, but not right now, right? So yes, later, or no. And what you got to begin to wrap your head around tonight, what I want to help you with, is that God will sometimes straight up tell you no for something that you want, something that you're asking for, and we don't always like that. I don't know about you, but learning about a God who's going to tell me no sometimes, I don't love that. Why? I don't like being told no, especially by God. Right? Isn't he the God of like yes and amen? And isn't he the God that says, ask and you shall receive? And there are truths to these things, but remember, you have to take every verse, everything in the Bible, and put it in the context of all of Scripture. Right? And there's gonna be moments, and so let me prove this to you. There's some people in the Bible that God said no to. I think about Moses. Okay, let's start way back in the Old Testament. Moses was told by God that he would not be able to enter the Promised Land. And right before the people of God are about to enter the Promised Land, Moses comes back to God and he begs and he pleads. He's like, God, please let me go. We've been going for 40 years. And you know what God says to him? No. I think about David. David in the Old Testament, he wanted to build a temple for God. They had been putting the presence of God in this Ark of the Covenant. They've been building tents for it. And he's like, you know what? God deserves better than a tent. Let's build him a temple. And so he starts devising this plan, and he's building this beautiful, beautiful temple. He's got the plans for it, and he brings it to God, and he says, God, I want to build this for you to honor you. And God's like, look, bro, those are some nice plans, but no, I'm actually going to have your son build this temple. I think about Paul, who said in 2 Corinthians, he says that there was this thorn in my side. There was this affliction, this ailment that I had, and I asked God 3 different times to remove it from me. And every time God said no. I'll go back to Paul and Silas. They wanted to preach the gospel in Asia. And so they're headed that way, and God, through the Holy Spirit, he comes to them and he says, no, I actually don't want you to go to Asia. I want you to go to this other region because I have a different plan. You may not understand it, but God said no. I also think about Jesus. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's on his knees, and he is pleading with God. And right before he goes to the cross, he's saying, God, if there is any other way, if there's any way for this cup to be taken from me, can we please devise a new plan? In his humanity, he's begging God. He's sweating blood, according to the book of Luke, and he's saying, God, please remove the burden of the cross. And God the Father responds to God the Son, and he says, no. And Jesus finishes off that statement. He says, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done, which is a great thing for you to add to any prayer that you pray, but Jesus still asked for it to be removed. And I just happen to think that if God would tell Jesus no, what makes us think that he wouldn't tell us no? There's gonna be moments, I promise you, there will be moments that God, as you ask for something, he's not saying like, maybe later or sure, he's just gonna say no. I think it's important that you know that sometimes God will say no. Because if all the things, I really want you to think about this for a moment, this is important. If all or most of the things that you're asking for are not happening, and you haven't created space in your theology for God to tell you no, then what are you gonna begin to assume about God? If I'm asking and nothing is happening and you're thinking, well, what's God doing? Is God just ignoring me? Is God upset with me and just doesn't want to do the things that I'm asking? Is God not powerful enough to fix this? Does God not care enough to fix this? And these are not only erroneous, but these are also dangerous conclusions for us to draw. You know, it's one of my goals and one of my aims as a pastor and really even just a friend to you, to help you avoid faulty assumptions about God that will ultimately lead to really bad conclusions about God. And one of the worst and one of the bad assumptions that we have, one of the bad ways of thinking in modern Christianity right now is this idea that God is just gonna say yes to everything that we want. That if I ask in the right way, and if I've had like a really good week, like if I didn't cuss for a week, God's for sure saying yes. Right? Some of y'all think that way though. Like the better I do, the better God hears me, and the more he's gonna wanna give me the things that I ask for. And if that's the way you're thinking, then you're still not wrapping your mind around grace or the gospel. It's not about performance, right? It's about a position. And God took you from having to live a life of performance to now we just live a life of position next to Jesus, where his goodness is now our goodness, where his righteousness is now our righteousness. And so God does not love one believer more than another. He's not gonna give more to one than another. And so we have to get that mentality out of our mind, but we think, man, God just he wants to say yes to everything that I ask him. As we hear this stuff, I feel like everywhere we go. And the problem with that way of thinking is we end up turning our relationship with God into something that's actually transactional in nature. And so let me illustrate it like this. How many of you guys love Starbucks? Let's just go with Starbucks, okay? We love it. How many of you guys hate it? Like way too hipster for Starbucks. Okay. I appreciate Starbucks. They were the genesis of all this stuff. But now I want you to imagine with me for a moment. You walk into Starbucks, it's a transactional place. You're gonna walk up to a cashier and you're gonna say, hey, I'd like this specific drink, right? You're gonna be like, for me, I'm gonna order a tall blonde Americano and a grande ice water. That's what I'm gonna drink. That's it. Sometimes I look at the menu like I'm gonna change my mind and I don't. Just stare at it like, what's new? Don't care. Okay, so tall blonde Americano, grande ice water. Some of you have the most bougie Starbucks order I've ever heard in my life, right? How many of you guys going in and you got like 500 syllables to your order? Like, can you just admit it? You know it. Okay. We got one honest person, my brother. Okay. It's true, though. It is true. My gateway was the white chocolate mocha and the vanilla latte. Anybody? Yeah? Okay. Never mind. I used to be so ashamed of my order, though, that when they would be like, Brandon, we got a grande skinny vanilla latte, and I'd be like, it's not mine. I'd literally let it sit for 5 minutes and then just like walk over to the counter, like, just grab it, you know, like. So I was like, I gotta start drinking black coffee. So we roll with it now. But here's what happens at Starbucks. You go to the cashier and you say, this is exactly what I want. And then you pay them for it. And because you paid for it, you now should hopefully receive that coffee or that item. It's a transaction. But many of us, we pray that way. We say, God, this is exactly what I want. And because I prayed for it, then I should get it. And God goes, that's not how this works. Prayer is not transactional. Prayer is not a transaction. It is a petition. Petition means a request. It means to ask somebody. And so when it's transactional in nature, it's God, this is what I want, and this is what I feel like I deserve, so please give it to me. When a petition is actually you coming to God saying, God, this is what I'm asking for and this is what I want. But ultimately the answer and the response is completely up to you. Do what you want to do. It's a far better way to pray. And I promise you, some of you will actually start to see God respond more to your prayers when they become less transactional and more of a request and more of us asking God, not demanding from God. He doesn't work that way. So the transaction says, I did my part, now you do yours. The transaction says, I paid up, now you pay up. While the petition says, I asked, and now I will wait for your response. Now tonight as we talk about those moments in our life where God says no, I don't want to really spend or waste any time talking about the obvious no's. Those things you ask for with like bad motives, where you look back on it like, actually, yeah, God probably should have said no to that. I'm not talking about the things like ladies in here where you're praying that God will get you a meet and greet with Shawn Mendes so you can fall in love and get married. That's not what I'm talking about. Because he's saying no to that prayer millions of times and probably to you as well, okay? And football season is coming. I'm not talking about my prayers coming up 16 times where I say, God, please let the Dallas Cowboys win. Please. Is he gonna answer that? Probably not. Okay. We all know. We know what's gonna happen. Prayers like this, right? Or I love this one. This is one of my favorites. When we go, God, please help me pass this test that you didn't study for. And God's like, you're on your own for that one, fam. Like, I'm not jumping in there. I'm not putting my name on that. You ever notice, like, we get real spiritual right before a test? You haven't prayed or listened to worship music in a month, and you're driving to UNM just, like, worshiping your heart out. You don't even know the words. You're just, like, humming. It's like, who's this band, And then you're praying, and you're just like, God, and you get like real like Pentecostal spiritual, like, God, as my hand hovers on that Scantron over these answers, would you give me the spirit of microeconomics and quicken my heart to circle the right answer in Jesus' name? And you're like, what have I become? This is where some of you are. Like, that's your prayer life. It's before tests. Those are your most spiritual moments. Okay, I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm not talking about the obvious no's where God's just like, look, that's kind of a dumb request, right? I want to talk about the difficult no's. The ones that are a lot more difficult to process and understand. No's like when you pray for God and you come to God and you say, God, please heal me. And God says, no, I have something different in mind. That's hard to swallow, right? Or you come to God and you say, God, please take away this depression. Please take my anxiety, and God says no. Maybe if you're married or when you get married someday and you say, God, please give us a baby. And God says no. And you watch as he gives babies to other people who are struggling like you were, but maybe it never happens. I'm not about to try to explain that. I don't know why that happens. But sometimes I know that God, he's not just not answering that prayer, but God is saying, no, I have something different. God, help me find someone so I can get married. I want to have a spouse. I want to have a family. Help me find somebody, and God says no. Or maybe God says, just not right now. It's not the right timing. Look, we gotta wait a little while. There's some things I want you to learn, some things I want you to figure out, some things I want you to get out of your life before you add somebody else to it. God, help me get accepted to this grad school, and he says no. Please keep my parents together. And God says no. And honestly, on that one, God's not saying no because he doesn't want your family to stay together, but God's not gonna come against people's will and make them do something they're not willing to do on their own. But God, keep my family together. When I think God oftentimes is looking at you to be the one to step in and try your best, right? It's not your fault if your family fell apart. I gotta be so careful how I say that. It is not your fault if your family fell apart, if they're falling apart. But God's saying, do everything you can. You pray for your family. You engage with your family. You love them the best that you can. But God's saying, I'm not gonna bring them back together. God, open up a door for a different job. I hate my job. God says no. What do we do with moments like that? Because I want you to hear this. Sometimes the no we get from God literally makes no sense. Honestly, have you been there before? Where God says no to something and you're like, God, why? Like, I don't understand, honestly. Why would you say no to that? That is a good thing. I'm praying for somebody to be healed. Why in the world would you ever say no to someone being healed? And God's saying, I'm not looking for you to understand everything that I'm doing. I'm just looking for you to trust everything that I'm doing. You will not understand it all, but I am asking that you trust it all. It won't make sense half the time, maybe most of the time, but do you trust me? And when the no makes no sense, it's those moments where we will face some of the greatest tests of our faith. And this is something that I think we have to reconcile tonight and for the rest of our life. And so now we know that God does say no. Hopefully I've done a good enough job of building that case, that God will say no sometimes, maybe a lot of the time. But I want to spend the rest of our time tonight kind of asking and maybe answering the question, why? Why would God say no? I don't want to just leave us here with like, hey, God's going to tell you no sometimes. Get out of here. Let's go. But why? Why would God do this? So I got 3 reasons tonight, and I'm going to give you all 3 up front real quick. Don't write them down. You won't be fast enough. I promise. Just wait for it, okay? 3 reasons God sometimes says no. The first is this, because God has a higher perspective. Number 2, because he has a better plan. And number 3, because he has a greater purpose. 3 reasons God says no. You ready for it? Okay, my wife is. Are you guys ready for it? Okay, thank you. Number 1, God sometimes says no because he has a higher perspective. Isaiah 55, verse 8 through 9. So God has a higher perspective. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9 says this, my thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord. And my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher, everybody say higher. Just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways. And my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. You know, this is kind of a basic just principle of life. But you know, the higher we go, the more we can see. Have you ever been up on top of the Sandia Mountains? And I mean, you can see for miles, right? You can see more up there than you can from down here on the ground. The higher you go, the more you can see. Whenever I read this verse, I mean, I'm tempted sometimes to think that God's just like bragging on himself. He's like, my ways are just higher. Deal with it, right? But I think what God's trying to show us is he's saying, guys, because my ways are so much higher and my thoughts are so much higher, what I'm trying to reveal to you is that means that you can trust me at such a bigger and deeper and greater level. I have a higher vantage point. I have a higher perspective, and I can see things that you can't see. God's like, man, I can see some of the things that you're gonna miss in this life. You know, I was, like I was saying a moment ago, I was just in Orlando with our teenagers, and we spent one day in Universal Studios at like Hogwarts land and all that, just being sinful in Hogwarts, you know what I mean? And then we were in Disney World for a couple days, and Disney World was just packed with people everywhere. And, you know, I'm not like the tallest guy in the world. I don't know if you noticed this before. I'm like 5'8.5". These shoes, I might be like 5'9". So I'm tall. I feel like I can dunk right now. But, so we're walking around Disney and like, you know, I'm not seeing very far. I'm just seeing the back of people's heads, or if they're real tall, just their back, you know? And so we get in line for Space Mountain, and we're in this line is literally 3 hours long. People are waiting. We luckily got some fast passes. And so we're going through, but the fast pass line is still super long. And I remember in Space Mountain, it was so packed with people, literally 2 nights ago, so packed with people that I can't see. I'm like in this line and I'm like, okay, we got 5 minutes left, we got an hour left. Like I literally don't know where we're going. But luckily, I was in line with one of the tallest people that I know. His name's Garrett Stidworthy. He's our associate youth pastor, and he's over here, and the guy's like 6'5", okay? Is that true? The guy's 6'6". Just rub it in, bro. Okay, 5'8.5". I heard somebody the other day say that it's only short people that use the half, or, you know, the added, because you ever hear a guy that's like, I'm 6'6.5"? But you do hear the girls that are like, I'm 5'1" and 7/8". Let's go. Where are my fellow, like, shorter people at? Where are you at? Okay. Where are the tall people at? Get out of here. You can stay. Just kidding. Anyway, so Garrett's in line with me at Space Mountain, and I vividly remember I looked over at him, and I was like, Garrett! You know, I had to, like, yell up to him. And I was like, how much further do we have? And he literally just, like, turns his head, like I'm trying to climb poles and, like, look, and he just turns his head. He's like, like 5 minutes. He's like, I can see the roller coaster. We're going to be on in just a second. And I was like, sweet, let's do it. Let's stay. We got time. And here's the deal, okay? Dumb analogy, but I think profound point. Hopefully. Not you. You're not dumb. But because Garrett had a higher perspective, like literally, a higher perspective, he could see further down the line. And he could see things I couldn't see, which caused me to want to stay in line. I was like, I got to get out of here. But he's like, no, let's stay. We've only got a couple more minutes left. I can see what's ahead. Now, because God has a higher vantage point and a higher perspective, he can see further down the line, and not the Space Mountain line. He can see further down the line of your future and of your life. And so because of that vantage point and that perspective that he has, God will say no to certain things, and sometimes things that are good things, because it might look good right now, but he's saying you have no idea where that's gonna lead, and I promise you, you're not gonna like it. It looks good now, but it's not good for where you're trying to go. And it's that perspective that sometimes will cause God to say no, because something might benefit you in the short term, but it could destroy you in the long term. You know, because of our limited perspective, we often don't see the unintended consequences of what we're asking for. God says, I don't mind you asking, but you have to not mind me saying no, because I'm gonna see the things that you don't see. One of the things that I love so much about God is that God understands the difference between what you want now and what you want most. And so if you're, a sold out believer, a man, a woman of God, and deep down inside of you, what you want most in life is to be a man of God, to be a woman of God, to have a godly marriage, a godly family. If that's in your future, it doesn't have to be, but you wanna, sell out to work, you wanna pursue God, you wanna help this world, you wanna grow the kingdom of God. That's what you want most in this life. So God knows that, right? God knows your heart, he knows your desires, he knows the way you think, he knows what you want most, but God also knows what you want now. The problem is that what we want now does not always serve what we want most. And so he will help you kind of understand that, look, this looks really good. And I know you want it right now, but this is not part of what you want most. So I'm gonna say no. This is not part of the plan that I have for you. This is not something that you want in your life. And so God, when he says no, I'm telling you, he's saying no out of love. So in my house right now, I feel like I talk about my kids every week. I'm not gonna apologize. So I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter right now, and so she's running around terrorizing our home. But she's awesome, she's cute, we love her to death. I think the most common word used in my house right now is the word no. She's learning it, she's telling me no, and I'm like, what do you mean no? Let's talk about this. So she's telling me no, but even more than that, we're telling her no. It's like everything she's doing and asking for, I'm like, no, don't jump off the stairs. No, don't go out there. Don't open the door and go outside. Don't open the garage on your own. Like, there's so many things going on, and I was thinking about this today, like she will wake up, and as she's still rubbing her eyes, the very first thing she will say to me is not, Daddy, I love you, it's, I wanna watch YouTube. It's the first thing that comes out of her mouth. Every morning, I'm not kidding. And every time I look at her, I go, no, honey, like not right now, okay? Like maybe later, but we can't watch YouTube every morning. And she just gets so upset. She starts crying, she's just like so sad, and I feel so bad as a dad, but I have to tell her no. And why do I tell her no? Because I hate her? No, because I love her. There's a vantage point and a perspective that I have, things that I've read, TED Talks that I've watched. If you watch TED Talks, you're a genius, right? And so these things that I know, that if little kids are watching YouTube and their iPad 24/7, their brains turn to jello, right? Like they can't connect with other human beings as well. They have a hard time learning in school. And so I'm looking at my daughter like, I know you want to watch YouTube, but like, I'm gonna tell you no because I have a greater perspective than you. So again, she wants to watch YouTube. Also, she's really picky about what she wears right now. And she wants to wear a dress or a tutu every day, all day, every day. And she loves to wear the same ones. And so she'll often come to me and she'll pull a dress out of the bottom of the dirty clothes, and she brings it to me and she goes, Daddy, I wanna wear this one. And I'm like, you just wore that one yesterday. It's got like Carson's spit up on it, and it's got all kinds of things on it. Like, it stinks, we can't put that on, Finley. And she gets real sad, she holds it to her chest and she says, but I love it. And then at that point I'm like, okay, fine, you can wear the dress. Like I'm a bad dad, I'm too easy on this stuff. But I'm trying to tell her, like, you can't wear that. It's dirty, it stinks, you're not gonna have friends. Like, people are gonna wanna hold you. And she gets so upset about it. And also, Finley, like every morning she comes down for breakfast and I'm like, what do you want? I'm like, can you want a banana? Can I make you some eggs? The girl loves avocado. So I'm like, you want some avocado? Like, what do you want? She goes, no, I want to suck her. And I'm like, look, I always get down on her level. I'm like, I like where your head's at because I want to suck her for breakfast too. I'm cool with that. But we can't have a sucker for breakfast. Like, you got to have something that's good for you, something that'll help you grow, right? And maintain. And also, like, she can't have candy all the time because the girl's gonna get cavities, right? So I'm having to tell her no. She doesn't understand that I have a different perspective. When I was a kid, I literally had like 8 fillings and caps in my mouth. Like, I literally, at 9 years old, I had a grill. And not because I was a gangster, but because I had cavities. For real. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, I don't know where my parents were, but I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna brush your teeth. And I'll put them on blast all the time, like, for real. Like, did we never brush our teeth in our house? There's a perspective that I have. There are things that I know that she does not know. So I have to step in sometimes and help her. I have to step in and help make decisions for her. And I don't tell her no because I hate her. I tell her no because I love her. And it's the same from God. God's no is never meant to define you or diminish you or defeat you. His no is one of the biggest blessings you can receive in your life. It's a blessing. He has the vantage point. He has the perspective. A no from God is never a negative. I promise you. We can thank God. Thank you for telling me no. Thank you for helping me avoid maybe one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Now I'm going to move on. And so God, he sometimes says no because he has a higher perspective. Number 2, he sometimes says no because he has a better plan. God has a better plan. You know, no often feels like a rejection, right? And so when you go to ask somebody out on a date and they say no, instant rejection. When you wrote that letter in 2nd grade, check yes, no, or maybe, and they checked no, it still stings today, right? When you went out for the basketball team and they said no. When you applied to a bunch of colleges and you got a bunch of letters back and they said no. Maybe you tried out for the worship team and they said no. We can all make a joyful noise, but it doesn't mean we can all make a beautiful noise. Like, it's just, it is what it is, guys. That was hurtful. But here's the thing, no can feel like a rejection, right? No can feel like a rejection, but I want to tell you this. God's no is never a rejection, but rather a redirection. God does not reject you. God's not telling you no because he's like, well, actually, I like them better, so I'm going to tell them yes and you no. I don't like the things that you've been doing, so I'm going to tell you no. The no is not an indictment of who you are and your character and your standing with God. It's not a rejection. It's often a redirection. He says no because we're banging up against some wall or some door saying, God, that's where my plan is. That's where my dream is. That's where I need to go. And God's like, that's not my plan for you. So I'm gonna keep this wall up, hopefully so you'll realize this is actually a dead end, not just a shut door. And you will turn around and you will go in the direction that I ultimately want you to go. Could it be that God says no to something good when he wants to say yes to something better? Could it be that when God says no to your plan, it's because he has a better plan? Is it possible? Could it be? I think God wants you to drop your plan and pick up his. And I know this is difficult for some of you because you like your plan. Like, you've been planning your plan since you were 4 years old, right? And you love your plan, and you've told other people about your plan. You've spent money on your plan, and ultimately your plan has become your dream. It's not just like my plan for my life. It's like, this is my dream for my life. But let me ask you this. If you've got a plan or you've got a dream, what is going to happen to you if God looks at that plan or that dream and he tells you no? What happens? And I think that's more difficult for some of us than others, but we have a choice in that moment. I think we have one of 3 choices. We can become defeated. And I see this happen in people where they work so hard and so long for a specific or a certain end, and it doesn't work out. God essentially says no, and they're like, it's all over. I literally have nothing now. I am nothing. I don't know what I'm going to do. So some people get defeated. Other people just get a little bit of grit inside of them, and they decide, you know what, God said no, but I'm going to ram my plan through that door anyway. I'm going to go ahead and just roll with it. God said no to that relationship, but I'm still going for it. God said no to that school, but I'm still moving there. Because we ultimately don't care, because what we have planned is more important to us than what God has planned. And I think the third option would be for us to not become defeated, but realize, okay, if this is shutting down, if this is a dead end, well, maybe God does actually have something better for me. And so what I'm going to do is not get defeated. I'm not going to try to push my plan through anyway, but I'm just going to submit and surrender my life to his plan. And that's the best option. That's the only option, in my opinion, is when we decide I'm gonna be obedient to the plan of God in my life. We don't like the word we don't like the word no, but we also don't like the word obedience, right? But here's the thing, obedience when God says no, it may feel like the death of a dream, but it's actually the birth of something beyond your dreams. You know, my Bible says that God, he will do exceedingly and abundantly above anything that you could ask, think, or imagine. Now that can become some crazy, weird Christian cliche where we just like put that on our wall, or it's like a little thing on your desk or whatever, it's like on your mirror. You're like, he can do all things, you know, like, and it can become some weird cliche that just kind of helps us to strive after our dreams. Like, God has so many big, amazing things for me. One of the things I want to help make clear, when I talk about God's plan for your life and the plans we have and the dreams we have, guys, God doesn't just have these massive plans and dreams for you to just like go out in the world and be awesome and just be great for the sake of being awesome and the sake of being great and the sake of being known by people. God's great, amazing plan for you is always tied to the harvest. It's tied to the fact that more people still need to know who Jesus is. His plan will always be about making this world a better place and advancing and moving the kingdom of God forward. Right? If your plan or your dream, if you think that it's like making it to the NFL or making it in to be some, tech god on some level, look, those things are great. But God will only let you get there if you're making the decisions to use those things to advance his purposes. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than your dream. And so God can do abundantly above what we ask, think, or imagine. And so obeying his plan, when he says no to your plan, it's not the death of your dream, but it is the birth of something beyond your dreams. So if you're a planner, I think you need to hear this. You're not destroying your future by obeying God's no. You're actually positioning yourself for it. It's not like, oh my gosh, God is changing everything. Everything that I've ever worked for is gone. It's leaving, and we can freak out and we can panic and think, I don't have a future now. But when you finally will say, okay, when God says no, you now have positioned yourself for the future that he had in store for you before you were ever even born. God's obedience is not a passive concession. It is actually an active confession. Now, here's what I mean by that. We look at this idea of obedience as something that dogs and kids are forced to do, right? Like God's like, okay, come over here, sit down. And we're like having to run, like, okay, God, I'll sit. Like God's not letting me hang out with my friends anymore because they're not good influences. And we could think that it's like this passive concession when we obey. Okay, fine. God's making me do things that I want to do. When in all reality, true obedience to God is not a passive concession. It is an active confession. What I mean by that, obeying God when you don't know the outcome, when you don't have all the details, maybe when you don't even like what he's asking you to do, I think is one of the greatest confessions of faith you can have in your life. Because you're basically saying, okay, I'll step out and do it, not knowing the details. I'll step out and do it even though I don't want to, because God, I know that you're good, and I know your plan is better than mine, and I know you're gonna have my back all along the way. It's a confession of faith, ultimately. And so we can say, God, I will obey the plan you have for my life. If God says no to your plans, I promise you it's because he has better ones. Submit to them. Surrender yours over and take his. The third thing tonight, God will sometimes say no because he has a greater purpose. Because God has a greater purpose. When I read that, I immediately thought of Paul. And Paul in 2 Corinthians, he writes something kind of unique. And he says this, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in the second part of verse 7. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. And I love this. This thorn in this flesh, we don't know what it is, right? For 1900 years, people have speculated. They have guessed, they have argued, they have concluded. We don't know what it is. We don't know if this is some physical ailment that Paul had. We don't know if this was an element of depression or anxiety. If there was actually like a demonic presence or spirit that was following him, tormenting him. We don't know if this was feelings of insecurity or inadequacy. We have no idea. But I kind of love that we don't know. Because what God is about to tell Paul, I think what is true in what he tells Paul is true in what God is trying to tell you. And so we get to now take whatever issue or whatever thorn we have in our life, and we can apply it to Paul's scenario. We all have a thorn. We all have some kind of issue. We all have something that torments us and bothers us. And look what he says. I've got this thorn, and 3 times I pleaded with the Lord. He doesn't just say 3 times I prayed. He says 3 times I pleaded. I got on my knees and I begged. And I begged for the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You know, I had this thought earlier today that God will not allow your prayers to interfere with his purpose. We will sometimes pray for things to be added or taken away, but that very thing would actually interfere with God's purpose, and so that's where he's gonna come in and say no. Look what he goes on to say. He says, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And what a great passage. What a great truth. Paul says, I had this issue, this thing. And he said, I beg God. God, would you please take it? Would you please remove this from me? I don't want this anymore. And on all 3 occasions, God said no. And I love God's response, though. It's full of so much grace because he doesn't just say no. He tells Paul why he's saying no. And he says, look, I know you want this removed. And I know you think that if this thorn goes away, that this issue goes away, then you'll have joy. Then you'll be able to accomplish all the things you want to accomplish. But he says, that's not how it works. That's not going to happen. He said, you have to learn in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your difficulty that you want to be removed. It's in that moment that you need to learn that ultimately I am all you need. That my grace is sufficient for you in this life. If you have me, you have what you need. If you have God, you have what you need. 3 times I begged him. God said, my grace is sufficient for you. And then I love his conclusion. He says, for when I am weak, then I am strong. I think that God's greater purpose with Paul's ailment, his issue, his difficulty, was that God was trying to keep Paul in close proximity to him. Paul was having to learn to lean on God. He had to learn to lean. He said, I can't be dependent on myself. I can't be dependent on my knowledge and on my skill. I need to be fully and completely dependent on God. So God said, you have this difficulty, and I'm not going to take it because while you're in pain and while you're in difficulty, you're consistently reminded of your weakness. And when you're aware of your weakness, you know that you need my strength. When you're weak, you have to step out so God can step in. Man, I love when God steps in because then we don't have to fight our battles anymore. God will fight your battles for you. It says, when I'm weak, then I am strong, but only because I'm reminded of the strength of my God. You know, I was thinking about this. My son Carson, he's 9 months old, and he's about the furthest thing in the world from a cuddly baby. You can't cuddle the kid. I encourage you to try. We're flying home yesterday from Orlando, and we literally have to pass him off every 10 minutes because, like, that's about the amount of time you can hold him before you're like, okay, I'm done. I got to give this kid to someone else. Like, he's just moving. He's going. He's trying to crawl. He's trying to walk already. He's standing up on everything. He's terrorizing the house as well. And the kid just never wants to cuddle. Like, since birth, I have not cuddled this boy. There's been a few times, though, in the past 9 months where Carson has gotten sick. And in those moments that he gets sick, if he has a cough, he has a little bit of a fever, he's got a cold, for whatever reason, in those moments, like, that's when he wants to cuddle like crazy. Like, he does not want to be put down, and this maybe sounds awful, but as a parent, I kind of love when he has a cold, because he just wants to snuggle, and I'm like, finally. And I just love holding him, and he just lays his head on me, and I can feel that he has a fever, and he just puts his little arms over my shoulders, and he just cuddles. And I was thinking about that today, and I'm like, why is it in the moments that he feels sick, does he want to just be near me? Will he not let me put him down? And it's because he's in pain. It's because he doesn't feel good. He just wants to be held by his dad. He wants to be held by his mom. There's a level of comfort that he feels. There's a level of understanding that they're gonna give me the food that I need. They're gonna give me the medicine that I need. I just want to be close. And I just wonder if God sometimes lets us continue to struggle and be in pain sometimes because he's trying to get us to come close to him once again. He said, I want you to lean on me. I want you to depend on me. And I want to work on our relationship one more time. And so if God hasn't removed the difficulty, maybe he's trying to get you in greater proximity to him. He says, come near to me. And I want to close with this. So I thought of Paul, but I also thought of Joseph. Joseph was a guy in the Old Testament. He's called by God into leadership. He has these dreams. Long story short, okay, I'm going to fly through this. Joseph has this dream. God says, you're gonna be a leader. You're going to have authority. Soon after that, he's betrayed by his family, by his brothers. He's sold into slavery. He's lied about. He's put in prison. He's forgotten about. And he ends up getting in the middle of a 17-year process of living in complete obscurity, where he doesn't even know where he is half the time. His family thinks that he's gone, thinks that he's dead. And in the middle of this moment, I just think there would have been so many moments in Joseph's life. He was a young man, probably a teenager, where he would have been in slavery, in this dungeon. And I wonder how many times he just looked up to God and he said, God, where are you? God, please will you get me out of this? Please, will you send somebody to vouch for me? Will you send somebody to rescue me? And if not, will you just kill me? Will you let me die? And I wonder how many times he looked up to God and he called out. And he said, God, get me out of this mess. And God responded in love. And he said, no, you got to stay. What Joseph didn't know is that there was a greater purpose to his pain. What he didn't know is that after this amount of time, that he would eventually be released from this prison, that he would be the only one who would predict a famine that was coming to the land, and that through this, he was the only one who knew what to do to stop it, was put in second command in all of Egypt. In all of Egypt. And in Genesis chapter 50, his brothers who are starving and need food, they have to come to Egypt to where he is. And it's not till this final moment that we realize why Joseph went through all of the nonsense and all of the junk that he went through. And look what he says to his brothers. He says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He said, you had motives, but my God had motives. He said, you had a plan, but my God had a plan. He brought me to this position. Look how he's wording it. He's like, God brought me to Egypt, to slavery, to prison, eventually this position, so I could save the lives of many people. People, sometimes I've heard it said that Joseph could have been responsible for saving somewhere between 2 million and 5 million people from dying in this famine. And so for 17 years, he sits in prison and in obscurity and in slavery, saying, God, where are you? God, get me out of this mess. And God keeps saying, no, not yet, not right now. Maybe not understanding why God wouldn't rescue him, but God said, look, you'll understand eventually. There's a timing that I'm waiting for, and if you will be patient and you won't give up on me, you're gonna see that I'm saying no right now because there's a greater purpose later. There's something bigger. And I just wonder how many of you are praying for something. You're saying, God, get me out of this. And God is saying no. God is saying not yet, because there's more that I need to develop inside of you. There's more that I need to raise up within you. What you're gonna carry is heavy. You need stronger shoulders to bear the weight. There's a timing that I'm waiting for, and if you will wait and you will trust me, you will see the purpose that I've had the entire time. Be patient and wait on God. Promise you, for some of you, he's saying no, because there's a greater purpose. And his greater purpose might be bringing you back to him, or it might be the fact that he has a greater purpose for your life. And the influence you're gonna have, you have no idea what that's gonna look like. You know, tonight, again, I just wanna remind you that God's gonna tell you no sometimes. He's gonna tell you no because he's got a higher perspective. He's gonna tell you no because he's got a better plan. He's gonna tell you no because ultimately he's got a greater purpose for your life. When God says no, don't run from him. When God says no, don't get frustrated. But when God says no, say, okay, God, I may not know why, but I'm gonna roll with it. I'm gonna go with it, and I'm gonna trust that you have a better yes later in my future. Would you guys stand with me tonight?